Good evening, everybody. Today is August the 4th, 2020. The time is 5:38. Got a little late start. Technology sometimes seems to get in the way. I want to say on behalf of the Board of Education, we hope everybody is well and safe. We endeavor to provide services to children and families to keep them safe as well. And you'll see some of that discussion taking place today in light of COVID. But again, we just want to welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We, by state law, are allowed to conduct these meetings via distance social media technology so that folks can stay safe. There will come a point in time eventually where we will go back to in-person meetings, but of course, we're trying to figure out how COVID is affecting our community and how we can do that safely as well. You'll see some of that conversation happening today as well. So let's get right to it. We begin every meeting with a speakers list. Back in the day, folks, board members would listen to folks from the community come into 131 West Broad Street, and folks would speak up, speak their mind. But because of COVID, now we're doing it all through Zoom. So I understand we have one person who wishes to speak tonight, and they'll do that through Zoom. Is that right?
That is correct, President White.
Why don't we introduce that person and listen to hear what they have to say?
So Miss Kathy Smith, I'm asking you to start your video, and we're going to go ahead and unmute you. Welcome, Kathy.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
You have 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Smith. I'm a resident of Rochester, alumni and retired teacher of RCSD. I remind everyone that school buildings closed on March 13th, but education continued. The disparities and inequities of the educational process and lack of resources in the district became magnified and clear. I question the fact that RCSD has had a COVID-19 task force in place before the first confirmed case of COVID in the U.S. Their meeting schedule indicates that they have met on 26 occasions to date. There is no evidence that the instructional subcommittee aligned professional development to support teachers on remote platforms. During the 4 months of remote teaching using unfamiliar sources, dedicated, hardworking teachers did what they know how to do all too well, figured it out on their own. I conclude that the district leaders continue to react to situations instead of being proactive. Operating like this historically is a major fault and breakdown of the district. Building opening plans were submitted on July 31st to State Ed. Board commissioners, if you have not already done so, please read the plans for your liaison schools. In the interest of transparency, State Ed required that the plans be available for the public's understanding and review. Even if I am able to move past the fact that I firmly believe it is not safe or healthy for children, families, staff, or the community to open buildings, these plans are, as the governor said yesterday, incomprehensible. The plans are far from being parent or public friendly. They use education acronyms and introduce new vocabulary of synchronous and asynchronous teaching and learning. One school plan omits entirely their 5th and 6th grade students. Comprehension of this phase 1 is impossible to follow since most plans insert phase 2 calendar before discussing phase 1 completely. I strongly encourage the district to require every principal to meet virtually with parents for a dialogue to answer questions and concerns that parents may have before your deadline of August 14th. Otherwise, I am hopeful that the buses will be empty on opening day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Smith. And to all those who wish to express similar concerns or issues, or even a compliment here or there, feel free to do as Ms. Smith did, sign up to speak. Madam Clerk, could you describe for folks what the process is to make sure they get their opportunity to be heard?
Anyone wishing to speak can submit an email to boardofeducation@rcsdk12.org, and you can do so by noon on the day of the meeting. If you want to submit your comments in writing and don't want to appear on the Zoom, You can send it to the same address and your comments will be posted on the web. That is Board of Education at rcsdk12.org.
Thank you very much. Folks should also be reminded that you can also just listen, and you can listen in a variety of different settings. The Board of Education has arranged for you to witness these meetings and watch these meetings on Facebook, YouTube, and on our own district website. We would encourage you to do that. We are always sort of monitoring, seeing how many people are tuning in, because to that extent, you are aware in an ongoing way of what the district is doing. So often people get informed about what's happening in government just by headlines and breaking news. Well, the Board of Education wants you to be aware on an ongoing basis of what is happening in our district, not just when there are problems, but just how we operate. So we appreciate all those folks who tune into Facebook, YouTube, or to our own website. All right, next item on the agenda is we have to approve our minutes. Do we have minutes to approve? No, not for this section of the meeting. Next item on the agenda would be a special meeting discussion items. I understand there's a resolution related to BOCES. Is Mr. Kristoff going to introduce that, Madam Superintendent? No, not for this section of the meeting. Next
Yes.
item would be a special. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Kristoff, we have before us, we haven't considered it just yet, but there is resolution, let's see, 84. Let me get it before the full body first, and then you can describe for us what's going on. I need a motion, as I indicated, to discuss resolution 84 relating to BOCES. Is there a motion?
A motion.
Thank you,
Commissioner LeBron.
LeBron, I'm sorry. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Well, before we take any questions or comments, I think it would be best if Mr. Kristoff just provide us some background. Mr. Kristoff?
Yes, the resolution covers a straight up real estate lease between the BOCES 2 and the district of a portion of School 43 for the purpose of housing some of its classes that for reasons that I don't entirely understand because I wasn't involved in all of the background. But I understand that, however, that the BOCES does need the space, and the reason why an exception was asked for the board to consider it this evening is because of the circumstances in the BOCES. They've been unable even to notify their parents where their children will be attending. And so therefore they asked if we could accommodate a sooner review than the board's regular business meeting. There are no legal difficulties with the lease. It is certainly legally sufficient. The compensation is correct. They are, of course, paying us for the space. And I would certainly recommend that the board adopt the lease. I believe that either Mike Smith and or the superintendent may have further detail with respect to the background. But in terms of my role in the process, I can assure the board that the lease is legally sufficient for your consideration and that it can and should be adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Kristoff. I've got my participant list up. For those folks out there that don't know what that is, Zoom gives you a little list of people who, if they press a button, their little animated hand appears. So that's how, whenever anybody chairs these meetings, that's how we sort of identify who's interested in asking a question. So I got my participant screen up and I see Dr. Leslie Myers-Small has her hand up. Maybe she just wants to give some extra information. Leslie?
I did, thank you. This is a program through BOCES, as Carl said, for students with disabilities. These will be students from all over Monroe County, including our students in the Rochester City School District. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Any other questions for our superintendent or for our general counsel? It's a pretty straightforward resolution. We appreciate you all getting it to us in advance so that we could take a look at it. I guess I am kind of curious, is this any kind of windfall for us? Do we realize additional money in our coffers because of this? Is this a model that we might replicate in terms of generating revenue, or is it just not enough space to do that?
Well, in terms of the revenue per se, the lease price is $21,000 per month.
Yeah, I looked at that and I thought, boy, that could add up a bit. We're almost $1 billion organization, so I suppose some might say it's a drop in the bucket. But does this happen with any frequency that we could, or do we have any space where we could maximize opportunities to raise money? I'm sure that's what some people might be thinking. I see Madam Superintendent, I see Mr. Schmidt on the screen.
Agreed.
Are there any opportunities like this to generate revenue?
Yes, there certainly could be in the long term. This lease here mainly covers the expenditures for the utilities and any required maintenance and custodial services, as well as computer technology and so forth, whatever they would need to conduct that program for this fixed amount of time. So I would not say this is a revenue generator, but it certainly is not going to cost the district any resources.
Yes,
let me ask you,
actually, Mr. President, in
Sure.
as much as that isn't really our mission per se, we it would be very much frowned upon by some if we were to turn a profit, if you will, and turn this into a money-making proposition. It's just not the district's business.
Not the district's business to make money,
It's
but
not the business model. Yes, it's not.
okay, but let me just rhetorically say, sarcastically say, but it has become the district's business to lose money. So, I mean,
I don't think you'll get a lot of debate about that, unfortunately.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Christoph. Is it against and I'm merely exploring a conversation, given the district's history of deficit spending. Is it against the law? And I don't want to get into a debate with anybody about whether this is appropriate or not. I'm just exploring, given our history of deficit spending, is it against the law for the district to raise money? For example, naming rights to stadiums and so forth.
No, there are certain exceptions where the district can do that, but unlike other municipal entities, the kind of commercial advertising, if you will, that we could sell someone, like putting a sign on the side of our building and so forth. It has to be not large. I'm sorry. I'm casting about for the right word, and I can't. Relatively inconspicuous.
Okay.
About the only exception to that was a case that the commissioner decided some time ago, which was very controversial, where they permitted soft drink vendors to put machines in the buildings with lighted signs and so forth, pursuant to something called a pouring rights contract. That's about the only exception with respect to commercial advertising, if you will, that would be conspicuous.
Interesting. All right, just exploring. Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, I guess for me, my only question is around the building maintenance. And if they're hiring their own maintenance, are we utilizing our maintenance, and also the RG&E? Like, who's responsible for that bill?
The lease covers all the utility expenditures, including RG&E, and if there's any maintenance to be required, they will be responsible to pay our people to do the maintenance.
Okay, so it'll be our staff doing the maintenance, but they're gonna pay for that, or that is coming from the sum of the lease that they're paying us?
It's already, most of it's already built into the lease. If there's something beyond that we need to take care of for them, then they would pay us for that as well. We don't believe, after our walkthroughs with them throughout the summer, we do not believe there's any maintenance that's going to be required for them to move in, but we have built in that expenditure if it needs to be accounted for.
Okay.
Our custodial expenses and the utilities and those type of the plowing, those type of things are built into the lease agreement.
And there is a provision, Mike, where the lessee will pay a proportionate share of the utility charges in addition to the monthly fee.
Well, I guess
we will pay part and they will pay part because they're not using the entire building.
Okay, well, I guess for me, that was the question that I really had in terms of the utility. That's what I'm trying to kind of get down to, primarily because I've seen other contracts in the district that we've had where we're also renting a space and we're paying a larger portion of the RG&E to rent that space, which I've brought up before. I don't agree with, because in a normal leasing, I mean, we agree to those terms, but that's how it is.
Yeah, but as Mike pointed out, that proportionate share is rolled right into the monthly rate. That's how the monthly rate was calculated in part. by including their proportionate share of the utility payments.
So that's,
It's
I guess
expressly
that's what I'm
provided for in the
asking.
lease in paragraph 5 for anyone who has the the lease that was sent.
Well, that's what I'm asking, Carl and Mike, just for clarification, that what they're paying, we've already factored what the
Yes.
cost is on average for the RG&E and the utilities and the maintenance, and that's part of the total sum that they're going to be paying every month.
Yes, ma'am. That's right. Mike
So
is
we won't have
absolutely right.
to endure an additional expenditure down the line for us renting and becoming landlords, if you will, to them if something comes up.
Correct. We have that discussion from the onset, Commissioner LeBron.
Thank you.
Mhm.
There's another provision with respect to repairs, just kind of to complete the answer to the question, where if repairs are necessary by reason of the lessee's actions, even if the lessee doesn't undertake them at its expense, we can and bill them for it, and we have the right to be paid for that.
I did notice that the fourth paragraph of the resolution indicated that the services to be provided included utilities, routine maintenance, custodial services, trash removal, and internet access. My question was, how was that calculated? By prior use? Just so that we make sure, we want to make sure that there's no, that we didn't, and the district has unfortunately done this in the past, not anybody here, but we have sometimes underestimated what our costs are, and then we end up having to make it up in the prior fiscal year. So how did we calculate what those costs were and incorporate them and subsequently incorporate them into this lease agreement? So all these different things that are in paragraph 4 of the resolution, was that just done on prior years?
In general, yes, President White. We have certainly a long history of the utility bills and the maintenance bills and so forth from that particular facility. And what we basically did is took the number of students that are planning to be there, the number of classrooms they're going to utilize, and then it was very easy to come up with some analytics that would drive us to that particular number. So it's not classroom specific, because it is a cafeteria, it is a gymnasium. There's other areas of the building that they will be utilizing that all figured into that space usage.
Okay. All right. Any other? I see Dr. Jallo raised her hand.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I just want to remind the board that one of the DE recommendations states that whenever you see a resolution that has a fiscal component to it, or a fiscal responsibility, that it is supposed to be accompanied by a cost analysis over the year for said resolution. So in the case of this resolution, there should be information attached as to how much all those costs are associated with this lease, how they come out for the year, and it should also show the revenue that you're getting for the year and the net income that you're getting for the year attached to this resolution, so that those questions are answered when you read the resolution.
I don't know if that changes anybody's position about voting for it. Mike, what's the time frame for this? Carl, I think you suggested this had to be done sooner than later, or no?
If I could just answer before Mike does that. So I think the work is already done, and so we can get that information. But as you said, President White, BOCES was looking for us to make this move sooner rather than later so they can move forward given the start of the school year. So if it pleases the Board of Education, we could provide all of that information, but I will say we started the conversation when the request was made after we had the conversation with you all to include all that information. So we can provide that and will provide that information to the board. And we did take that approach, and certainly moving forward, we can make sure that that is included in resolutions. But I would respectfully ask that, again, we move forward because that approach was taken to formulate it.
I think what our superintendent proposes is a wise approach, not only with respect to this particular resolution, but going forward, you know, we ought to make sure that I would note at the bottom of the resolution does sort of make some generic statements about funding, budget code, but it doesn't provide the level of detail that Dr. Jallo is talking about.
Correct.
But what's interesting about her reminding us is that a number of questions that were asked this evening were related to that. What kind of revenue might it generate? What might the cost be? So, you know, I think you're right, Superintendent. This is something that we probably have to do right away, but we should be reminded that this has to be included in future resolutions that have financial ramifications. And by the way, most things in this district have financial ramifications. I see Commissioner LeBron and then Commissioner Powell.
Yeah, so I just want to request that we get that information by the next finance meeting as an attachment, because I personally want to have a date to know when it's going to come versus we're going to get it to you, because I've been in this district not more than 3 years, but long enough to know that these conversations happen. And if we don't have a deadline on them, it slips through the cracks, and then it takes, one person has to remember harass others for it. So I just want to have an end date, and I'm going to propose that it's brought at the next finance meeting as an attachment.
When is that, Commissioner LeBron? Do you know? When is that meeting?
That should be next week. We're either the 11th or the 25th. I
thought it was the 25th. I thought governance was next week.
Madam Clerk, do we know when that next finance meeting is?
August 18th.
August 18th. So
18th. Okay, split the difference.
Superintendent, can we get that by the 18th?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Thank you, Superintendent. Commissioner Powell?
Thank you. My only observation was with regard to a template or a format for the kinds of information that Dr. Jallo suggests that the board should see. We could turn to any one of the staff reports that's given to the Board of Regents. Generally includes a scope, purpose, and recommendation, or a question, and poses a question and then gives a recommendation or something that along those lines. But if one is casting about looking for a template, that's a good place to look. Or if you look at the old document, the way that City Hall used to advance proposals to the City Council, it was generally accompanied by some kind of a memoranda that included scope, purpose, recommendation, and so on. But whatever we do, it should be in a format that becomes routine and comfortable for all departments across the organization.
It's a great suggestion.
Right. It is a great suggestion. Any other questions or comments or suggestions? Don't see any. So on that note, we're going to go ahead and take a voice vote. Thank you. And to do that, we're going to make sure that everybody has their video cameras on so our clerk can record your vote. All those in favor of resolution number 84 indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Seems, Madam Clerk, that the ayes have it. That resolution has passed. All right, we're next going to shift gears a little bit. For folks out there maybe watching for the first time, sometimes the Board of Education combines meeting. That was just a special meeting. Now we're going to convene a meeting of our policy committee. One of our principal functions as a board is to develop policy and to make sure that it is being enforced and being enforced by the administration. And so I'm going to convene a meeting of the policy committee. Poof, it's happened. We're having a policy committee meeting. And we're going to begin with the review and acceptance of our meeting minutes from June the 2nd, 2020. We had a policy committee meeting then. There are minutes that are taken down. And can I get a motion to approve those minutes that were drafted for June the 2nd, 2020? I think I heard Commissioner Malloy. Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. All those in favor of approving those minutes indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Ayes have it. Those minutes have been approved. Next item on the agenda, Policy Committee agenda, is the discussion of the Code of Conduct. Now, my understanding is now Ms. Wade is just an amazing employee. She's really kept this moving along. But the purpose of this being on, colleagues, is to afford the superintendent an opportunity to provide a response to some suggestions that have been made to amend the Code of Conduct. Is that right, Superintendent Myers-Small? Do you want to go ahead and give us that update or your response?
Sure. So thank you, President White, and good evening, Vice President Elliott, and all of our commissioners. So I am aware, I was not here when this happened, but we have a school culture and climate committee that is made up of various stakeholders, both school staff and parents and the community. And I believe Commissioner Adams is a part of that group as well. And they met over several meetings to review the Code of Conduct and to make recommendations to the district as a result of their meetings. And so there are 25 recommendations that they made to the district, and you can see them, that they're placed on the screen. How we delineated this is that we indicated what the original content in the Code of Conduct was, then the school culture and climate report, then what their recommendations were in red, the administrative recommendations, so the response of myself and Carl and Melody, and then the rationale behind it. So you can see there is agreement with 24 of the 25 recommendations. It just so happens that the first one, and I'll go over that, no caps or limits placed on length of long-term suspensions. The school culture and climate recommendation reads as follows. If it is determined that such a form of discipline should be employed, e.g. the long-term suspension or LTS, should not last more than 20 school days, inclusive of the initial short-term suspension. The district, however, should strive to limit LTS to 7 days. Consecutive LTSs should not be imposed. Moreover, students in grade 3 or lower should not be eligible for long-term suspensions, and consecutive long-term suspensions should not be imposed. And so my response to that is as follows. I'll start with maybe the easier one, and that's students in grade 3 or lower should not be eligible for a long-term suspension. So both principals and the superintendent can, and that actually goes against school law. So we do have the ability to do that. One of the things that I would suggest as a friendly amendment to that, and did this obviously in a smaller district, but with suspensions of our younger students, they should be far and few between long-term suspensions. We did what was called a member check. And so the principal needed to either call myself or either the elementary assistant to the superintendent or secondary. And if it was a student with disability, they called the assistant to the superintendent for inclusive education and instruction. And they talked through that long-term suspension, what it entailed. Sometimes if they were not available, I did get involved. And if it had unique nuances to it, I certainly became involved with the situation. But we talked the situation through, and we had a conversation about what the details were. And just to get all of the information, looking at even the evidence that they had, et cetera. And why this was important, because it takes away the emotion that sometimes gets involved in a situation when you're up close and personal in a school every day. There are relationships that are formed, et cetera. And so this took the emotion, and it was just a third party kind of outsider looking in, helping to make that determination. And sometimes I did overturn, other times I maintained what should be done. But I would say that and again, I'm getting to understand our culture in the Rochester City School District. And so I suppose I would need to have further conversation. I'm a little concerned over the language of the LTS should not last more than 20 school days. And again, I don't know the things that have happened in the Rochester City School District, but I know some of the things that happened in my previous district. So for example, and this was actually a situation that was appealed to the Commissioner of Education to make a determination. We had a student that really would be constituted similar to a hate crime. The student was very inappropriate on a bus and sang a song that was very inappropriate, insensitive, filled with hate. And I did suspend the student long-term. The hearing came back for a very long time, several months, but because I believe in restorative practices, I limited it to a much shorter time. I think I more than halved it, and then there were some restorative pieces that were inserted into that. And the goal was really to have the student not repeat the behavior. And it was not just a one and done interaction. It was over several weeks and actually months that the student was involved in the restorative piece. And really, it was difficult at first because the student had difficulty understanding even what was done was inappropriate or wrong. But again, the power of restorative practices of continuing that support and working with the student. And we were able to transition that student from one level of schooling to the next. And it was a very supportive process where the rest of my tenure in Brockport, where that behavior did not rise to the level. There was no behavior that came about, but I know that the board and our community feels very strongly about long-term suspensions, and I rarely do that. And again, I haven't looked at all of our data to see the extent, but I do think that that's something that is in the purview of the superintendent to review, and I review those very carefully. Melody and I will be meeting with our hearing officer in the next couple of weeks to review the expectations relative to hearings. Carl is actually going to be involved in that meeting as well to have those conversations. But I feel that that for some instances that can be extreme, that 20 days, and to have the student immediately back or for a short term back in the school, the situation was very traumatizing to the students on the bus. And to have that student back in the school sooner rather than later, we needed to take some time to actually work on the behavior, again, through a restorative lens and framework. And so, that we felt that was very successful. I don't know, Melody, if you wanted to add anything else, but that's my response to and that's the only one that I differ on. The other 24, I'm in agreement to move forward.
You're muted, President White.
Yep, thanks. Deputy Superintendent, did you want to add anything before we go to the questions?
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. No, I think Dr. Small covered it all. We just want to make sure that what we are recommending follows educational law. And I do believe in restorative practices. I've seen it, and like Dr. Myers said, it works when it's in conjunction with the suspension, because it's about teaching and taking the opportunity. When kids can't read, we teach. When kids can't do math, we teach. But when students misbehave, we tend to punish without that teaching piece. And I think that's what Dr. Myers is alluding to about the restorative practices, that even though it might be a long-term suspension, we still want that teaching piece to help the student build the skills so that next time the behavior doesn't occur.
Okay, we got a bunch of folks that are interested in asking questions or making comments. Let's begin with Vice President Elliott. That she'll be followed by Commissioner LeBron, then our General Counsel, Mr. Christoph, and then Commissioner Adams. Vice President Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I
I will first start off by saying that if we had made the decision based on the fact that we did not, we were not advised of that the superintendent had that kind of discretion, there may have been a different conversation. But let me just say, this is probably one of those areas where I'm down the sword on, because I think it's just so important, Dr. Myers-Small, in this district. I remember when I first ran, there were 14,000 suspensions, right? Yeah. And then we got it down. And then I think under one of the former superintendents, Bohan Vargas, I think those suspensions began to go back up again. Okay. Because we had, I think we had stopped looking at it because we had trusted that the district understood the position that the board was taking on that, and that we did not want to have our students outside of school. A couple of reasons why. First of all, no learning is being taken, and a number of those suspensions, the data that I looked at, those suspensions were between the ages of sixth grade, the grades of 6 through 8, where, you know, those, and mostly African-American boys. Sure. And they're just knuckleheads doing that point. And so as opposed to the teachers and the principals looking at them and finding creative ways to provide an educational environment, they suspended them. And oftentimes, and Jawanza Kajufu had talked about this, when you have, first of all, excuse me, when you have a predominantly, in our case, a predominantly female white population, they tend to suspend Black boys the most. Okay. We wanted, and the community wanted to stop that. We didn't have a great, what is it called, links, and they were only providing tutoring services to our students a couple of hours a day. That's just that whole educational practice has just been unacceptable. And so as a result, from my perspective, as a result of that, that's why we said no more than 20 days. The other piece of that, Dr. Myers-Smalls, is that by the time the decision comes to us, you know, if there's an appeal process, sure, already, you know, multiple months that have gone by, and our students are not in the classroom learning. These kids are knuckleheads. We understand that, but if people are going to work in this district, they're going to have to be able to be more creative working with the urban environment. I don't know the situation out in Brockport. In you know, you talk about different demographics. Yeah. I don't want our kids to be out of school any longer than they have to be out of school. Now, to your point about, you know, one of the students in Brockport making these kinds of egregious racial remarks, I believe. You know, that may be something where we have to discuss, you know, what is considered extreme. But in general, I don't want our kids to be out in terms of long term, longer than 20 days. And then in short term, I think we had 7 days. We don't do a good job in educating our kids, number one. And number two, to have them out of school for 40, 50 days, almost the entire school year, that's just quite unacceptable to me, Dr. Myers-Small. So.
Vice President Elliott, could I just ask, where did the 20 come from? Or I don't know, maybe I would have to go back to the committee where the 20 came from.
I know that I was talking about 20, and I'm not sure if, and maybe Commissioner Adams could talk more about it, but I know that was something that I was talking about, that we do 20 days for long-term suspension. But, you know, when Commissioner Adams gets his turn, maybe he could share from the committee's perspective. Okay,
great. Thank you.
I can also jump in here as well. I was the staffer for the School Climate Advisory Committee. The 20 days was decided after deliberation with a team and with the community. So it was a number that was constructed to tie as well in with the Safe and Supportive Schools Act. That's where the 20 days came from. So I hope that answers your question, but we will be bringing in the School Climate Advisory Committee representatives from that committee to the next policy meeting.
Right.
And they will be able to respond to any kind of questions like this.
Right.
They have our back and forth on the recommendations and the response.
Okay, fair enough.
Next, I see Commissioner LeBron.
Yeah, so a couple of things. When I read this, I mean, I do have some of the history and understanding. One, Kalia has talked about this as a staffer over the last 2.5 years. So this has been a back and forth.
Okay.
And then also when I worked in the district, this is when this was actually being implemented and kickstarted. But so a couple of things. One, I do want to agree with, I'm going to agree with some of the stuff that Vice President Elliott shared. I'll say some because I do think she called our kids knuckleheads. And I think it feels that way when they make decisions. But having raised kids, I could just tell you, kids are kids, and sometimes they don't make the best decisions, especially in the moment. And we all make mistakes, and we all have our bad days. So this is why.
Well, let me just apologize for saying knuckleheads. Their attitude, their actions are of a knucklehead, whatever.
Yeah, they make poor decisions at times. I get it. I want to recognize that. Having raised kids, I know, and it doesn't stop. Let me just tell you guys. You guys know I have a kid going into 4th grade and 20-year-olds now, and it doesn't stop. It's never ending. But what I do want to say, I share strongly with the same concerns in terms of what happens when our students are in long-term suspension and the lack of real education and education loss that is, and learning loss that happens when they are in long-term suspension, particularly because we don't have a strong alternative system for education for them. And so when we're talking about students who are already coming in and are struggling academically for a number of reasons, and then they make a bad decision, and I get that sometimes these bad decisions can cause physical harm to another being. I get it. And I've been there. I was a fighter when I was in high school and I was growing up. So I get it. We make poor decisions. It was the environment I came from as well. So there are lots of layers to this environment and trauma and upbringing. All those things are factors.
Yeah.
But what we end up doing, I do believe, when we have these long-term suspensions is that we further disadvantage that student academically because we do not have a strong alternative education plan for them. So that's one for me. Two, I strongly do not support and will never support children 3rd grade and under being suspended. Never has made sense to me to have a kindergarten long-term suspended. That just doesn't make sense, but that has occurred in this district. And so I want to be very clear that I see that in here. And I also see that the admission rationale mentions that some of this has to be taken to the state legislator. And I certainly will I'm going to ask Carl a little bit more about that piece, because personally, I will join whatever efforts to take it to the state legislators to remove long-term suspensions from any school district in the state of New York for long-term suspensions for kids 3rd grade and under. So I just want to put that out there. And I do believe at one point this board was having conversations around creating policies that did not permit that did not permit suspensions, period, for kids in 3rd grade and under. And I don't know what happened with those conversations and where it went. But I think for me, that's my biggest concern is what happens during long-term suspension. So
Got it.
We're saying we're practicing restorative. We should be able to practice restorative for 7 days to allow the student and anyone else impacted to have a cooling off period. But then the real work is when that student does come back and the restorative practices that they do to restore and make the wrong whole, I guess. So I think those are the concerns I share around this, and also having witnessed, and like Commissioner Vice President Elliott mentioned, that by the time these students and their parents appeal, the time has been
passed.
Yes, that they are out of school, and the alternative that we offer is just not, it's not a good alternative.
I saw that Commissioner Adams had raised his hand as well. Commissioner Adams?
One thing, there was a proposal for a moratorium on suspending kids in K through 2 or K through 3, and I think it was either the big layoff in December happened or COVID happened, one of the two. But it got pushed to the side. But in reference to this first thing that we're talking about, people have to acknowledge that here in this district, we were out of control with the suspensions. I mean, out of control. Nowhere in the country would a community accepted the type of suspensions that was going on here. So while we was taking a look at it, a young kid from Buffalo got murdered while he was out on suspension, and which really made us dive into this full-fledged. So the language we had used in there, it was strive towards a 20-day limit. There's always going to be room for exceptions to the rule, but that's what we wanted it to stay at, to be the exception to the rule, not the rule, because that's what we was looking at. We know there could be extreme cases where you need to do what you need.
That's helpful to hear, Commissioner Adams. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's what we were when we said that we know that there's going to could be exceptions to the rule, and that's why we use the language of strive. And with that, we'll save the rest for the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
In case folks didn't pick that up, Commissioner Adams mentioned it, so did our superintendent. There's conversation, and I think Kalia mentioned it as well. This conversation is going to continue. The board is not going to take any action today. Right. This was just giving the community and the board an opportunity to hear the superintendent's reflections or comments on this, as she is new to the district. Although there's been a lot of good folks, including Commissioner Adams and many other people who have worked on this for many years. And from what we can see, it has had an appreciable, significant effect on the number of suspensions that we experience. As Vice President Elliott pointed out years ago, suspensions were out of control in this district. And I think we've made some progress. And I think if the performance indicators suggest we're moving in the right direction, maybe a good portion of it is attributable to the fact that this work began a few years ago, and students are now in their seats rather than out in the streets. So we want to thank the community for their work, and we look forward to hearing from you again, Superintendent, and after you engage in your conversation with the committee. When is that? Do you have a date for that yet? That conversation? All right. So are you muted?
All right. My conversation was with the hearing officer. I thought at the next board meeting was when we were having the conversation with the committee. Was that
the next policy meeting on September 1st?
Right. Okay.
By the School Climate Advisory Committee.
Right.
So obviously we all in the community will hear more about this in a month or so. So we as a board look forward to that. I see Carl. Yes, go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I think Carl was before me. Go ahead, and then I'll go.
Go ahead, Carl. Oh, we actually got quite a few. Carl, and then Vice President Elliott, and then Commissioner Powell. Carl?
I'll tell you what, let me defer until everyone else has had the opportunity, because I just have an information piece that may or may not be relevant to the September 1 meeting.
All right, why don't we continue with the commissioners, then Superintendent will get back to you, and then to Carl. Vice President Elliott?
I just want to acknowledge to you, Dr. Maya Small, and to the two deputy commissioners that came in. We had a great group from the community who did this work for at least about a year, I believe.
Okay.
They did an amazing job. If you really want to see how folk from the community can really work and to have the staying power and the consistency to get this work done, this group did that. And so I just want to acknowledge that. I know that this group has been acknowledged before for doing this work, but you know, it never gets old to just thank the community for the work that they have done. And so, you know, to Commissioner Adams before he was on the board, and others who had participated in the process. They hung in there, they stuck in there, and just it's an example of how we can work effectively with the community to bring about changes on behalf of our students and ultimately on behalf of our community. So I just wanted to thank that group that worked on this issue with us. Thank you very much.
Before I get to Commissioner Powell, I want to piggyback on what Vice President Elliott said. And there are too many people to remember, but we should point out that our own Commissioner Adams, before Ricardo Adams, was Mary Adams, and she, I think, was the liaison to this committee. I know she did a lot of work, so I would be remiss if I did not call out her name. But there were a lot of people who got us started. And we should also point out Superintendent Myers-Smalls, that your predecessor, Bohan Vargas, was the superintendent at the time. And he, my recollection is he welcomed, I think I was just starting off as being president, he welcomed this effort, which is really community-based. And I know there were some turbulent times during his tenure, but this was clearly one of a number of the highlights. So I don't know if he's listening or watching, but he deserves credit too, because as a leader, he said he welcomed community engagement and let the community, my impression was, sort of watching, let the community sort of lead the way. So thanks go to him as well. I see Commissioner Powell and then Carl.
Mine is just a question. Don't we have a code of conduct hearing coming soon? And is it required annually, or is it required only when we're contemplating changes to the class?
If I can answer that, it would be the latter.
Correct.
Now, the code needs to be reviewed every year, but there doesn't have to be a public hearing unless you're proposing changes.
Mm-hmm. Do we have something on the calendar?
Not as yet, because the board has not adopted a resolution with respect to the changes. I think what the sequence was going to be was that we were going to have this discussion in committee. It would then be recommended out of committee. There would then be a public hearing so that the board would have the benefit of that, and then the board would consider a formal resolution.
Correct.
So this is only the first 25 of some 53 recommendations, folks, so we do have a ways to go.
All right, I thought I had seen, was it? Well, Carl, you were the last person. Did you want to add something else beyond what you just said?
Yes, as well as.
If you're going to go last, I did have one more thing.
Oh, yes, please.
Thank you. So one, I just want to be very clear that I am not a suspension happy superintendent. Melody can tell you from our work in the previous district, it actually was very punitive at one point, and we worked and evolved. The code of conduct took several twists and turns, and it evolved very significantly to become much more restorative. And when I read through the recommendations of the Culture and Climate Committee, many of those things were embedded into the code of conduct from the previous district. So again, philosophically, I align very much so with, again, the majority of the things. And I think even with Commissioner Adams sharing that there might need to be exception, but not have it be the rule, I'm much more comfortable with. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear as well.
Carl?
Yes, and in terms of the work that has been done in reviewing these matters, I actually have been around long enough to actually have some history with this. This is the third administration now that has reviewed these recommendations. And the three administrations, as the superintendent observed, are essentially agreed with respect to the recommendations. And even to the extent that there are technical objections, there's rarely a recommendation concerning which the administration has not expressed understanding and general agreement with the premise, if not the exact technical change being proposed. So with that as background, there has been, not only by the committee, but also by the various administrations, a lot of work on this, and it's a pretty thoughtful job, I hope you'll observe.
All right, that gives us an opportunity to move on to the next item on our agenda. But before we do that, since we're giving out thanks again, a lot of internal work was done. Kalia, we don't want to leave out your name. You've been shepherding this work for quite a while, and we, the Board of Education, appreciate that work. So thank you for that. Next item on the agenda is student attendance and withdrawal policy and regulations in light of COVID-19 and reopening. Leslie, were you going to manage that part of the conversation? Who was going to do that?
Carl was. And
Carl.
just so folks know, this came from just as we were reviewing, reopening plan guidelines and attendance being one of the eight areas that we reviewed. We thought it would be important to update the board on what, if anything, might need to be changed or looked at relative to attendance, because it's in a requirement for the state education department. Carl?
Yeah, in my review of the board's policy, I think it's really in pretty good shape. What I suggest is that the regulation, and the superintendent and I have already spoken about this amendment to the regulation, should make clear that attendance at school will cover both virtual or hybrid or in-person attendance, given our current circumstances. But the policy itself is sufficiently broad that I don't believe it has to be changed. The change needs to really be with the regulation.
Any questions or comments for Carl or Leslie? If not, we want to thank you for keeping us up to date on that and watching that. That's a whole new world with COVID, and it is not unreasonable for us to make an inquiry about whether those policies are going to change because of COVID. But it's good to see that there aren't going to need to be changes to our policy. So please keep us up to date. Next item on the agenda, we turn to Ms. Wade to update us on the policy deliverables and the policy update chart. Kalia?
Yes, so there is only a brief update. I will say that I'm moving forward with ensuring that the policy deliverables are followed through as was discussed in the last policy meeting. I have a meeting on the calendar with Deputy Superintendents Melody and Janelle, and we will be touching base on these things, and I will come back with dates when those deliverables will be turned over to the board, and when the board can expect to see reports and those things coming out of that. In addition to any new policies that might need to be drafted, we did talk about a virtual policy with regard to virtual classes that NISBA did recommend in their March update. And so those are the things that I plan on talking to the two about, and I will come back to the next policy meeting with updates how we'll be moving forward. But you can anticipate that the September policy meeting will really delineate how the policy committee will be performing for the remainder of the academic school year for 2021.
Thank you, Kaya. And just for those listening, my colleagues understand when we take this job, when we get sworn in, one of the things they tell us at all the seminars we go to, that we are policymakers. It's like one that they say that is our primary function. So you'll hear during the course of the meeting the word policy referred to frequently and regularly, because many people believe, and rightly so, that that is a principal part of our job. So thank you, Kaya, Carl, and Superintendent for the work that you do to keep the district in alignment with board policy. All right, I think unless there's any comments or questions, we're about ready to go into executive session. And you all have heard me say this before. On behalf of the board, we cannot talk about personnel matters in open session. The law pretty much prohibits that. And Carl would tell us if we started mentioning people's names and their issues here and there. So when we have to talk about an employee, the board collectively, unanimously does it in executive session. And we do that by taking a vote. And so at this particular time, because I understand we have to talk about a particular employees and their terms and conditions of their employment, I'm going to need to have a motion to go into executive session so that we can talk about those things. Is there a motion from somebody? Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Is there a second to that motion?
That was Commissioner Malloy.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Is there anybody who will do a second?
Happy to second it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, wait, before we do that, I see Commissioner Adams. You raised your hand? Commissioner Adams?
Yes, you had just mentioned about us being policymakers and whatnot. Yeah. And I just wanted to say that me being a new commissioner, there's so much that I don't know. And I just want to give a shout out to Kalia for being so supportive, helping me look like I know what I'm doing. And so she's just so valuable. And I just needed to give you a shout out, Kalia.
Yeah, she is good. She is good at making us, and let's not forget Marisol. They're both very good at making us look good at what we do. So we do. I piggyback, and I'm sure the rest of his colleagues agree with Commissioner Adams. They do. Even for those of us who aren't new, it's hard to look good at this job as a commissioner, and so these guys do an excellent job in doing that. So Commissioner Adams is right. Thank you for saying that, Commissioner Adams. All right, but I need a vote. All those in favor of going to executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel matters related to particular employees and the terms and conditions of their employment indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to have to come out of executive session and vote. And since that's the case, I suggest you all go eat your dinner, go watch Netflix, do whatever you do, because we're not gonna, there's no need for you to wait for us to come out of executive session, because when we're done with executive session, I believe we will be done for the night. So on behalf of the board, good night and be safe. Let me know when we're in executive session.